Guess who we just run into right here? So I know you have the interview, but he's right here, waiting to board. Sizzler Kalanji. Sizzler, you're live on the Africa Forum, running African. And let me see if I can put him on hands free so I can hear you, Shane, while we talk. It's a weird way to do an OB Sizzler, but you know how we work. How we work here sometimes. All right, let me see. Okay. I can't even find the link, but here we are. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Greetings.
Yale, blessings, brother.
Yale,
yeah,
blessings.
Man. Yeah, man. Give thanks for the item journey, man.
Naturally.
Yes, man.
Visit to Africa, Sierra Leone.
Yeah, man. And we know that I always uphold the continent, you know. So, yeah, man. Give thanks, you know, man.
Naturally. It's a duty continue, you know.
Yeah,
and
man.
you'll hear a lot more, you know.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
so
man.
Just look out for the glory and the joy coming your way. Jamaica, we love you.
Give thanks, brother. Yeah, man.
All right, give thanks. So Shane, Sizzler is just sitting, waiting to board like the rest of us. Some of us are in lines already. Sister Jackie, I told you, Sister Makeda is somewhere. But be contingent. That's heading off to Sierra Leone as we board. I think some are already gone on. And this is going to be a 2-day festival, a 2-week festival. Oh, Sister Makeda is right here. Greetings, Sister Makeda. You're live on air. Ank Uja Seneb. Let me know if you're hearing me, Shane.
Yeah, man, we're hearing you quite clear.
Ank Uja Seneb, Shane. Life, prosperity, and health to you, to our listeners. We're coming to you live from Brussels. We're en route to Sierra Leone. As a matter of fact, as I talk to you now, I am literally in the line to board the flight to Sierra Leone. This has been a long travel. We started in Kingston on Friday, then to New York, and from New York to Brussels. Now from Brussels, we're boarding for Sierra Leone. Shane, good morning.
Yeah, man. Great morning to you, man.
Great morning to you, my brother. Grand rising to our listeners on the 107s. My name is Kabu Ma'at Kiru. However you're listening to us this morning, thank you so much for joining us on IRI FM 107.1 all the way to 107.9 on the internet at irifm.net, on your mobile apps, however you're listening to us this morning. Thank you so much. This has been one of the most look forward to trip that we've had in a long while. We're heading into the land of the lion for the One Nation Reggae Festival, which was developed in Sierra Leone with its inaugural event on Emancipation Day, August 1, 2025. And now this has blossomed out into not just a reggae festival, but an international global reggae festival headlined by some of the biggest names in reggae music, but also an ecotourism festival. And so the balance of power, I think, is shifting a bit towards ecotourism. We're watching to see how this plays out. There are conversations regarding partnerships between Jamaica and Sierra Leone. So we're watching to see how that play out also. We are in the line now with Professor Rosalie Hamilton, also Sizzler Kalanji. Some of the artists are already landed in Sierra Leone. Many are traveling with us this morning. Artists, DJs, creatives, people from the creative industries. I have spoken to quite a few of them. And Shane, you would, I'm sure we'll be playing those later inside of the program. But just to let our listeners know that that is coming up. In the meantime, though, there's not much that I can do because I am literally just about to board. But to say that we're looking forward to this festival that's upcoming. Shane Clark will be our continuity announcer for the rest of the morning. Shane, we spoke to Sizzler. He's been, I mean, what a treat traveling all the way from Kingston, and I'm talking about some long flights with Sizzler Kalonji. He was just here, as a matter of fact, and I'm not quite sure where he left, where he went, but he's probably gone on. Has he boarded? Nia Manifa. Hey, Nia, say good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, Uncle Shane.
Good morning, Uncle
Hi,
Shane.
Nia. Good morning. Yeah, man.
Shane also here, right in this segment is Gamma Mama G, our Maroon Chieftainess is right here with us. Gamma Mama G, how you doing?
I'm here. Good morning, Shane.
Blessings, Mama G. Yes, man. Blessings, man.
Yeah, I'm sure that if I go further up in the line, I will see Professor Rosalie Hamilton. Is she anywhere near? I'm sure she's somewhere up here, but let me just walk a bit. But that is to say that we're literally in the line. Do you understand what I'm saying, Shane? Just moving up to, and we're not cutting down anybody. Just, is she here? Professor Rosalie Hamilton? No? Oh, Sister Jackie is here. You're going to be here from Sister Jackie later on. Also from the Scots Hall Maroon. You're live, Sister Jackie.
Hi. I'm here waiting to go to Sierra Leone. So we are actually waiting to board right now. So
and this is Sister Jackie
from Brussels.
And she's traveling with Sizzler Kalonji.
Yes, Crown Prince of Maroon, Cultural Ambassador. I'm traveling with him.
Has Sizzler boarded already?
No, yeah. We haven't boarded. You see it right.
Sizzler? We're live. Shane, are you hearing me?
Yes, man. We're hearing you quite clear.
Guess who we just run into right here? So I know you have the interview, but he's right here, waiting to board. Sizzler Kalonji. Sizzler, you're live on the Africa Forum, Running African. And let me see if I can put him on hands-free so I can hear you, Shane. While we talk. It's a weird way to do an OB Sizzler, but you know how we work. How we work here sometimes. All right, let me see. Okay. I can't even find the link, but here we are. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Greetings.
Eel, blessings, brother.
Yeah,
blessings. Man. Yeah, man. Give thanks upon the item journey, man.
Naturally.
Yes, man.
Visit to Africa, Sierra Leone.
Yeah, man. And we know that I always uphold the continent, you know. So, yeah, man. Give thanks, you know, man.
Naturally. It's a duty continue, you know.
Yeah,
and
man.
you'll hear a lot more, you know.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
so
man.
Just look out for the glory and the joy coming your way. Jamaica, we love you.
Give thanks, brother. Yeah, man.
All right, give thanks. So Shane, Sizzler is just sitting, waiting to board like the rest of us. Some of us are in lines already. Sister Jackie, I told you, Sister Makeda is somewhere. But be contingent. That's heading off to Sierra Leone as we board. I think some are already gone on. And this is going to be a 2-day festival, a 2-week festival. Oh, Sister Makeda is right here. Greetings, Sister Makeda. You're live on air.
Hi, Jamaica.
Shane Clark, yeah.
This is Makeda.
Hi,
recording artist and good morning, how you do?
I'm great, you know.
That's Shane.
Yes.
Wonderful. So we are in Brussels. We're heading to Sierra Leone for the One Nation Reggae Festival, where I'll be performing alongside some other artists. And it's a good vibe.
All right, thank you so much. We should come by surprise, but I know we've sent in our interview, so you'll hear her talking again. My sister, how you do? Say hello to Jamaica. You're live.
Hi, Jamaica.
Give them your artist name.
This is Courtney coming to you live all the way from very, very cold Brussels.
This is Courtney. I'm telling you, listen, it's a vibe as we go into Sierra Leone. Throughout, so lots of stuff will be happening, Shane, as we said before. We'll be covering all of them. Just to give you what we're in the line. I mean, this is really awkward, but just to give you a bit of them. Shane, we have had all kinds of broadcasts over the years, but this is a new one because we've never had a broadcast from a 9 going to board a
While
plane, right?
boarding a plane.
No,
Yeah.
this is the first. This is the first. All right, so let me tell you what's coming up. So as I said before, the One Nation Reggae Festival. Then, just to give you the date, November 25 to 30, the official launch of the One Nation Reggae Festival. This will happen on the 25th and the 26th. It will be Freedom Heritage Tour. This is a historic tour of Freetown and Peninsula with strong Black diaspora heritage connections. There's also the Creative Clinic that will be happening. This will also include an evening session. As I said, there's going to be a massive reggae concert. Sizzler is headlining one of that concert. It's going to be on that's day 4 festival concert. That's a grand festival. Many Sierra Leoneans are expected to be at that. DJ sessions and so on will be happening there. But this will be going on. Then the Heritage Celebration on Bunce Island, that will be on November 30. But long and short of it, Shane, just to wrap this up, is to say that a whole lot will be happening here. Well, I say here, but I'm in Brussels going onto the plane, but it will be happening in Sierra Leone. And just to give our listeners a taste of what's coming up, you have the interviews that we have we recorded here on our way earlier this morning. So you'll hear from Sizzler Kalonji again. You'll also hear from our sister Makeda, from Professor Rosalie Hamilton, and members of the team who are literally heading as we speak to Sierra Leone. I'm sure that I'll still be on board, en route to Sierra Leone while the program is on, and I can't say that we will land before because this is a 6-hour flight, but we'll definitely be linking across the week, and then again a live broadcast, a full live broadcast next week Sunday.
Man, just reminding you, and as you heard before the break, Kabu is en route to the One Nation Reggae Festival in Sierra Leone, and so you heard her join us for the introduction, and you know we get a snippet chat from Sizzler and a couple of the other persons there en route as well. You know, so the One Nation Reggae Festival was developed in Sierra Leone with its inaugural event on Emancipation Day, August 1, 2025, and has become a successful channel to unify the diverse cultures and creative potential of Sierra Leoneans, Caribbean people, the Americas, the United Kingdom, and the wider Atlantic world. The event seeks to preserve our shared heritage, advocate preservation through the activities that intersects reggae music with peace, social cohesion, non-violence, no to drugs, ecotourism, and cultural exchange. You heard Kabu say all that, you know. So, yeah, man, we're just reminding you as to what's happening. And, yeah, man, we are going to go up to the next break and then come after the break. Yeah, man. We have some interviews, as you heard Kabu say. We have several other persons who en route with her, who spoke to her earlier this morning, and we're going to give you some pieces of that, you know. So, yeah, man, just stay tuned. Yeah, man, keep your company as we keep your company. Yeah, man, give thanks, beautiful people. Good. It is the Africa Forum, Running African. Shane Clark here in studio holding the fort for Kabu Ma'at Karoo en route to the One Nation Reggae Festival in Sierra Leone. You heard her join us earlier this morning, just before the 6:15 break. She mentioned that she did several interviews, couple interviews earlier in the morning, just before they were boarding. One of those interviews was with Sizzler Kalonji, Miguel Collins. And so we now give you an opportunity to hear that interview.
My brother Sizzler Kalonji, you were recently given inaugurated and, if you will, installed in one of the most serious ways that an African in the diaspora can be installed by Africa. Talk to us about that. Crown Prince, the honor that was bestowed on you by Africa.
Rastafari, greetings in the name of the Most High, His Imperial Majesty Emperor King Selassie I, Jah, Rastafari. Speak the truth, cast it what it will. Whosoever hide and do the wrong will continue to do the wrong still. All those honors being bestowed upon Sizzler is just a continuation of the great works of our ancestors, our forefathers and mothers. It all meant that we should push on through these dark times, dark ages, and redeem our people. It's all about the renaissance of Africa, African renaissance. It's all about shining light, giving inspiration to those who have been in a very bad state, bad situation. It's all about rejuvenation. It's all about taking the people from the dunghill and putting them on the top, on the pedestal, the place where they really belong. My duty is to redeem the whole entire world, especially Africa, the people in the Caribbean, reminding them of them true selves, where they're from, as to where they're supposed to be going. Now, as the Royal Crown Prince, my duty is to get the government of the black man, black supremacy government, in full force, in full form. And there's a lot of royal families beyond Sizzler's crowning as a crown prince, or even as a regent for Rastafari, even as the indigenous president, as the treasurer. You have the Ethiopia Africa Black International Congress, True Divine Church of Salvation, which were the founder, Prince Emmanuel Charles Edwards. That was at 54B Spanish Town Road, now headquartered Lion Bay, Bull Bay, with the Melchizedek Order on the mountain, where that stand to bring everyone to memory of their true black self. It's not just to be in this world, having this physical form and not knowing itself. On the spiritual level, as His Majesty stated, that the material world and the spiritual world must be in full equilibrium, full balance. Then you have the 12 tribes of Israel. You have the Judah Coptic Church, the Selassie Rastafari Royal Ethiopian Judah Coptic Church. And you have the Maroons, indigenous sovereign Maroons. So our duty is to redeem the people, feed the people, help the people, and to fulfill the creed and try to get every black man, woman, and child back on the continent of Africa. Despite the Western Hemisphere belongs to us also, but there are families reaching out to us, and through these offices we started the work of the redemption of Africa, Rastafari.
And I see, Sizzler, and I know that you are committed to this purpose. Why are you so driven towards the unification and reunification of Africa?
Because I'm a Melanite son of the soil, and I've seen the dilemma upon my people, and it's for me to really push forward, put a hands on the handle, boots on the ground, and help my parents, my forefathers and mothers to get their children out of slavery, spiritually and physically. It's very important as a child of the soil to continue the work of the parents, and our work to be done is the work of His Majesty all throughout.
And this trip, what does it mean to you?
No, naturally, this is I would say, a renaissance, a reconnection, because known to the fact that I'm the Crown Prince of the Maroon, we knew very well that there was a deportation from Jamaica, where they had captured some of the Maroons and brought them to Montego Bay, and then afterwards shipped them out to Halifax, Canada, and from Halifax, Canada to Sierra Leone. So having this one Love Reggae concert in Sierra Leone is really a family reunion for me, and it's a continued research of finding our last parents through that time.
What does that search entail generally?
It entails discipline, it entails principle, love, harmony. It entails a whole lot, in which we've lost a lot of our families from that time. And you know that our family, they kept the knowledge and the family secrets for the nation. So it's really good for me to be going to Sierra Leone to find all these people physically. I would say descendants of those same Africans who were brought to the Caribbean island and then based upon the deportation and the slavery and the Maroon War with the British, they had returned to Africa. So it's just for us to see and know where they're at, be connected so families can start traveling to and fro Africa and the Caribbean.
And although it is well known, your own heritage is tied into this.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Well, it's really deep. It's a family secret I really kept because that's just about it.
All right. Make a push up on it, but not today. Sizzler, give thanks, my brother.
You're most welcome, Rastafari.
Sierra Leone, it is an amazing opportunity to connect with our roots, to have that understanding of where we're coming from, and we'll be also diving in a little bit as it relates to how we even got to Jamaica and the Caribbean. And we're currently in Brussels. We're waiting for a connecting flight, and I'm looking forward to sharing the music and experiencing the culture, learning about the heritage. And it's quite important for us as a people to know where we come from so we can understand where we're going as it relates to where we're at, and also to pass on this knowledge to the next generation. One love.
Along with Kabu, Professor Rosalie Hamilton and others. So, yeah, man, we have interviews, as we say, and so we heard Sizzler with Kabu earlier on, and now we give you that interview that Kabu did earlier this morning with Professor Rosalie Hamilton. Take a listen.
So I am with Professor Rosalie Hamilton. We've been on the road.
I'm telling you, it's been fabulous so far.
Yeah, what an adventure.
I'm telling you. Little cool here in Brussels, but...
Understatement. Was a little bit about the event that we're heading to, which is we're now in Brussels on our way to Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Give us a background to this event.
You know, the government of Sierra Leone has been wanting to deepen the relationship with not just Jamaica but the Caribbean, and have been engaged in a number of activities. One of them, of course, was the establishment of the Honorary Council in Jamaica. And so this is just another way of expressing that connection between Jamaica, Sierra Leone, and that connection is through music, you know. In fact, one of the interesting developments that I think we will have a chance to explore in depth in February is the origins of the Sierra Leone and Gombe music. Mm-hmm. Yes, mm-hmm. That has roots in Jamaica. Yeah. So, you know, so although it's you know, we look to Africa for, of course, our cultural base as it is, given our historical experience and so on, there's a lot we have offered to Africa that goes beyond reggae music, but to, of course, that whole rich cultural expression. So this particular event is not just a reggae event on one day, which is going to happen on the 28th, but it's a 6-day cultural experience that includes going to that place of no return, Bounce Island, and other kinds of cultural experiences. So we're really looking forward to it.
So we're getting to Sierra Leone in a few hours, and it's an interesting event, not just for the one day, but even the way things are being done, the utilization of the waterways, the plans for just for the team, for the group, and not just for Jamaica, I'm sure, but for people who are coming in to have an idea of what's happening tourism-wise, ecotourism-wise in Sierra Leone. I know you're also the Consul General, we call you all the time.
Honorary Council.
Honorary Council for Sierra Leone in Jamaica. Yeah. What a difference. But so tell us about, I know there are plans for tourism between Jamaica and Sierra Leone.
Yes. Well, I mean, of course, we've had a long history of developing extensive tourism product. Of course, there's much more we can do with respect to, leveraging not only our culture but our heritage, the historical experience we've had, and bringing Jamaica and bringing foreigners to Jamaica to experience more of that. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, we have a product, and Sierra Leone is in the process of building theirs. They do have emerging tourism industry, and many of the West African countries as well as East African countries are now trying to leverage this concept of heritage tourism as a big part of their pull, especially for Africans in the diaspora.
It was fun.
A lot on that.
It was finally, we're literally in the airport in Brussels, right? So that background ambience that you're hearing, we're in the airport. Tell us a little bit about the team that's going today and who are already there.
Yes, well, of course, there's some artists that are there already. Lucan is there, Eucanias and others. And we're traveling with Sizzler. So Sizzler and his team is here. Part of his team is here. Chris Martin's team is coming. And we have a team here of about 9 of us that comprise members of the honorary consulate, myself and 2 others, and of course you and your team, and Mama G is here. Yes, Mama G is here. And together we, of course, 3 of the emerging artists, Makeda, Courtney, and King Kali. And so these are young artists who want to make the names and can make it in Africa. We don't always have to make our names in the West, so
as Jimmy Cliff says. He did say that.
Yes.
So it's a beautiful team. We love it. So when we get on the ground, we'll hear much more, but in the meantime we are in transit. We get there in a few hours.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Professor Rosalie.
Thank you for coming. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you for everything. You got 2 from 1 team here through sponsorship. Thank you so much.
All right. All the very best.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof.
Heard Cabo there with Professor Rosalie Hamilton as they travel en route to the One Nation Reggae Festival, Sierra Leone. And we have more interviews that we will have come your way. For the program though this morning, so as you know and as you can hear, Cabo is on her way, on flight, and so we're not able to connect as we would want to. And so we have our contingency in place, as you heard Cabo say, and so for this morning, we'll be giving you a repeat of some of our In Search of series lectures. And for those who would know and have been with us over the years from them time, would know that the In Search of series happened sometime between 2004 and, we went up to, I think, 2006, thereabouts. So we have a Paul Bogle lecture, which is our first in the series of lectures that we will be giving you this morning. We have the Paul Bogle lecture, and that was first aired March 26, 2006, and that was part of the first In Search of series. The lecture was delivered by Dr. Clinton Hutton, and Dr. Hutton is a lecturer in political philosophy and culture, and he's also an author and also radio presenter. So, yeah, man, that's the first of the In Search of lectures that we'll be giving you. time on IRFM is now 7:01. So we go right into that first lecture with Professor Clinton Hutton, the Paul Bogle lecture from the In Search of series on IRFM from back in March 2006.
Good morning. When slavery ended in Jamaica in 1838, the social and political power of the slave-holding class never ended. And so the society that emerged after emancipation was very much under the direction and agency of the same persons who held black people in enslavement. In fact, one could argue that they took with them into their control of post-emancipation society the mentality and philosophy and psychology of the slaveholder. Their goal was to see to the development of a Jamaica in which they continue to play the leading role and in which blacks were marginalized. On the other hand, the formerly enslaved people wanted to redefine Jamaican society to suit all their needs, all the imperatives of development, imperatives emanating from their 350 odd years of enslavement in Jamaica. They wanted to see a society that very much suit their needs and aspiration. And this is where I think that we should begin our search, really, of the person that we know in Jamaican history, one of Jamaica's national hero, Paul Bogle, a man to which several of our popular musicians, including Bob Marley, Third World culture, have made songs about the Morant Bay Rebellion. Paul Bogle was born in the early 1820s. He was born in enslavement, and at the time of emancipation, he was either he was in his late mid to late teen years. After emancipation, there was a somewhat fairly rapid development, if you will, of a group of formerly enslaved people that call themselves or are known as own account persons. They work on their own account. This was essentially the emergence of a black middle class in Jamaica. And Paul Bogle belonged to that class of person. Bogle, like other persons like him, he, for example, was a baker. He was also a landowner. He had money in the bank. He had horses. He was involved in some economic partnership with George William Gordon, for example, in honey. He used to sell honey. In fact, there was an export trade in Jamaica involving honey. There were other black persons like Bogle. Some were, and I'll speak to some specific ones, because when we look at the leadership core of the Morant Bay Rebellion and of the movement in what was then called St. Thomas in the East, we find out that almost all of the leaders, in fact, there's only one of the leaders who was, I have seen in my research, who was in fact a laborer. The vast majority of the leaders of the Morant Bay Rebellion belong to this class of persons. Indeed, we could say that the Morant Bay Rebellion was an uprising of certainly an important part of that class of persons in alliance with tenants, with laborers, especially those who work on the estate. And in the case of St. Thomas, most of them were laborers in sugar. St. Thomas being the third largest producer of sugar in Jamaica. And in fact, in terms of the productivity of sugar in Jamaica, it was the most productive of all the sugar lands in Jamaica. So what we had developing in Jamaica after emancipation was a relationship between the emerging black middle class, at least an important section of the black middle class, along with the laboring class, and in St. Thomas, it was really an alliance between both groups of formerly enslaved people. Paul Bogle certainly had two children. I know of with his wife, and there are in my research indication that he had other children. The children with his wife are William and Elizabeth. Indeed, Elizabeth was married to a George Clark, who was a member of the local government, the vestry in St. Thomas, and they had children together. And George's brother was also a local government official, being a member of the vestry, was later executed by the colonial authorities led by Edward John Eyre for not involvement directly in the Morant Bay Rebellion, but for having said things long before the Morant Bay Rebellion, and they used the opportunity to suppress, to hang this man, and in fact they did similar things to other persons around Jamaica at the time. Bogle was a very religious man. If we were to describe his spirituality, it would have been, he was regarded as a native Baptist. Native baptism really is a merger of a Baptist faith preached by an African American, George Lyle, and another Baker, and a merger of that with the traditional African religion of most of the African Jamaican religion that many or most people of African descent subscribed to during slavery, which was Mayaism. If we were to describe Bogle's spirituality, what he had faith in, it would be a combination of that and what we later call revivalism. And there are two kinds, 60 and 61, 60 being Zion and 61 being Poco. And before I go further, to say that revivalism is very much alive in Jamaica today, and it is something to behold, and we really need to know more about that. It has played a very significant role in the development of spirituality and aestheticism, notions of beauty, how we decorate things, but also in relation to dance and music, including popular Jamaican music. And of course, I learned a year ago more definitively that really revival played a very important foundation of Rastafari in Jamaica, especially the early period of Rastafari. Bogle opened a chapel in Stony Gut in 1864. The ceremony for this opening of this chapel, at it, the guest speaker was an African American preacher by the name of Reverend Richard Warren. He was the guest speaker in Stony Gut at the opening of Bogle's chapel. Bogle was a preacher, well known throughout St. Thomas. He would occasionally go to Kingston, Spanish Town, and in fact, there's one report which suggests that he went even further than that with his preaching. But he was clearly known throughout St. Thomas. The chapel was opened by Reverend Richard Warren, an African American. In fact, I need to say that several African Americans came to Jamaica during the 19th century because if you remember, slavery ended in 1838 in Jamaica, and it was not until the 1860s that slavery was abolished in the United States. And in fact, some quite prominent black abolitionists visited Jamaica before slavery was abolished in the United States. Indeed, some of these black abolitionists were involved in the celebration of August 1 in America. August 1 in the United States was a very important day for African Americans still in enslavement. And African Americans in enslavement used to celebrate, used to mark August 1 to mark the emancipation of blacks in Jamaica and throughout the British Caribbean. Persons who have come to Jamaica, and one of them, which I'll note, is a man by the name of John Willis Maynard. Maynard was a very prominent black abolitionist in the United States. And in fact, before he came to Jamaica, he was a clerk on Capitol Hill, working under the Abraham Lincoln administration. In fact, I've read where Abraham Lincoln, in the administration, they sent him to Central America, to Honduras, to find out the possibility of land to send African Americans to. Because in fact, Abraham Lincoln blamed African Americans for the Civil War in the United States. And what they wanted to do, that to end conflicts amongst white, it would be best if blacks were sent out of the United States. And in fact, Maynard was one of those who was sent to Central America to look at the feasibility of that kind of policy formation that was emerging in the United States. It was somewhere around that time that I detected in the Jamaican newspapers letters by Maynard to the Jamaican press. In 1865, January, February, and so on, there were several letters in the Jamaican press about it. One, for example, the Sentinel published several articles by Maynard on the popular education. In fact, if you should read those letters to the editor, they are very much relevant today as they were then. In fact, criticizing, first of all, the philosophy of education at the time, which he felt was rooted in prejudice, rooted in racial prejudices. And in fact, that's one of his criticism. The second criticism was that sufficient persons were not in the education system. Sufficient black persons were not in the system, were not being educated formally. And in fact, he advocated what he called popular education. Not just education for black children, but education for black people on a whole. And that education should be technical education. It should be education that tells about the history of blacks. And it should be an education that help persons not just to use their hands, as the Sterling report on education would have focused on during that time, but an education in which black people become agency of their own life, become sovereign beings, if you will, become sovereign educators. In fact, during the suppression of the Morant Bay rebellion, Menard was arrested, and he was placed in a camp, taken to Upper Camp in Kingston, and he was not allowed to see his wife at the time, who was living in Jamaica, and had a child while he was in detention. And in fact, afterwards, he was sent out of the country. He went to New Orleans, and in fact, in 1868, there was a vacant seat in the Congress, the American Congress, and he ran for that seat in 1868, and he won. But the Congress passed a resolution so that they were not ready for a black person to sit. He was offered half of his congressional salary, but he was not permitted to sit in Congress, save for one time in which he was invited to address Congress to say why he should have the seat. But he was not permitted to, other than that, was not permitted to sit in Congress. John Willis Menard, why my talk about him was because he was intimately related to the movement in St. Thomas in the East and a neighboring parish called St. David, which is now a part of St. Thomas. In fact, he was closely allied to relatives and in-laws of Paul Bogle, attending meeting there. In fact, his views on education was indeed the views of his associates in St. Thomas in the East, and his very close friend Samuel Clark, whose brother married Bogle's daughter. Samuel Clark, he was staying at Clark's house, and in fact Clark was the one who was executed. Menard founded an organization called the Working Men's Literary Society of St. David, and in that was a debating organization, and in that organization they discussed several philosophical matters having to do with politics and the relationship with power and the role that blacks would command in that. So he was a very important figure and should be seen as part of that ethos, that radical black tradition that emerged from slavery, that was in slavery and which Taki was a part of, but emerged after that in the form in emancipation. An African American that was in Jamaica. In fact, he was here in the 1850s. Probably the most prominent black abolitionist after Frederick Douglass was Henry Highland Garnet. And Garnet spent about 5 years in Jamaica, in Westmoreland. Exceedingly popular. His works are available, his writings. A very radical person, highly regarded. Another one who was highly regarded as well and found himself in Jamaica was Samuel Ringgold Wald. Samuel Ward escaped from slavery in the South and eventually reached Canada, toured Britain, was a very active abolitionist, highly regarded, and he came to Jamaica. Well, guess what? In Jamaica, he found himself on the side of the planters, and in fact, really spoke ill will about Paul Bogle. He was operating in St. Thomas in the east, and had serious conflict with the radical black population in that parish. In fact, he died in Jamaica. He's buried here. He had children here and so on. Now, Paul Bogle is known in St. Thomas as General Bogle, which was one of the titles given to him, or he gave himself, and certainly his organization gave to him, especially during the military phase of the operation in St. Thomas in the east. He was also called Lord Bogle, and he was also called King Bogle. And this shows the highest esteem in which he was held in that parish. In fact, one could easily argue, and it was that without Paul Bogle, it would have been unlikely that George William Gordon would have been a member of the Assembly, member of the Jamaican Parliament at the time. He represented, he was one of the members of Parliament from St. Thomas in the East, although he was a man from living in St. Andrew. But persons like Paul Bogle and his influence campaigned for him to win his seat in St. Thomas, and indeed he won there. As a result of that, there were not many people in Jamaica who had the right to vote at the time. Just a few thousand, really a few. In fact, less than 4,000, less than 3,000 had the right to vote. And therefore, it says something for Bogle's quality. It says something for his influence, because the persons that would have been voting in the election, certainly his focus would have been on blacks and browns. They would have been persons with certain means, because you cannot vote without a certain level of the tax that you pay, as well as income and so on, and ownership of property, especially land and so on. So that he was a man of means, but he had to campaign among people of means to convince them to vote for George William Gordon. Not the blacks generally, including those who didn't have the right to vote. As Dr. Wilmot, Sweden Wilmot, who has written extensively on this, pointed out. But masses of ordinary blacks, men and women, were in that process, whether they were in it formally or not. They were part of that campaign, and George William Gordon had his seats, I think, primarily because of persons. Primarily because, first of all, of Bogle's leadership, and they were on that wavelength. They communicated, they were business partners, and so on and so forth. So that Bogle was responsible for George William Gordon's seat in the Jamaican Assembly. So he was quite influential. He would send his emissaries from Stony Gut to different parts of St. Thomas and call the youths, young men in different districts, and they would come. This is a mark of the influence of this man. They would come down to Stony Gut for his counsel. Clearly, Bogle was a serious political activist in the radical black tradition of Jamaican politics. So was Samuel Clark. In fact, Samuel Clark, whose brother married to Bogle's daughter, was the principal power broker, political power broker in St. David's, the neighboring parish. And in fact, that is precisely because of his influence that they executed him for things that he did not do. So that he called a damn red lie. This letter purporting to be coming from the Queen, which really came from the British government, of course, respecting the petition signed by persons earlier about the conditions to organize by especially the non-conformist churches in Jamaica. So he was executed because of his very important role as a power broker in the politics of St. David. In fact, one could argue, and if you should read Sweden Wilmot's work, you get more on the role of a person like Samuel Clark. But I mean, a politics that involves some level of coercion as well in campaigning. Stones, and in fact, it was in St. David that some persons involved in campaign, one or two, were killed in election campaign in the early 1860s. So we have to understand what was happening at the time. Ideologically, if we could look at some of the ideas coming out of that tradition to which Bogle was a part. Certainly, the principal slogan of the Morantby Rebellion was color for color, skin for skin. A slogan that was adopted by the early Rastafarians in Trinityville, where the first Rastafarian commune developed under Leonard Howell's guidance in the very early period, early 30s of Rastafari in Jamaica. Another slogan of the Morantby Rebellion was Black Man Time. That was a slogan of the Morantby Rebellion, Black Man Time. Another slogan of the Morantby Rebellion was Lion. In fact, all three slogans, Lion, Black Man Time, Color for Color, Skin for Skin, was adopted by the early Rastafarians, who were largely Kumina practitioners in Trinityville in St. Thomas, before they were driven out by the colonial police and they went to Pinnacle in St. Catherine. And then in 1954, Pinnacle was broken up by the colonial police again. So that we see a sort of a continuum in some of the ideas of persons from that tradition coming down even to this time. Bogle was of the view that blacks should cleave to blacks and cleave from white. And so when for example, about 13 or so police officers were sent, constables were sent into Stonygut to arrest Bogle on the eve of the Morantby Rebellion for some incident at a trial just 2 or so days before in Morantby, to which Bogle was attending. Those constables were apprehended in Stonygut, and they were forced to swear to cleave from the white and cleave to the blacks. They were Bogle and certainly the tradition to which he belonged to felt that the unity of black persons was exceedingly important if they were to make any headway into terms of their own economic development.
Safe, reliable, great value. Always buy from an authorized IGL dealer. The time by IGL is
7:45.
In terms of the principle of equality, one of the notions of freedom and justice emanating from the radical black tradition in Jamaica during that time was racial equality. That was a very, very big issue in Jamaica. And it certainly was a part of the philosophy of the Bogle movement and of the Morant Bay Rebellion. The issue of education, and a specific type of education, popular education generally, and an education also rooted in the philosophy of racial equality, in the philosophy of seeing and looking at the development of blacks around the not just during slavery but before slavery was a very important part of that philosophy. In fact, Menard wrote one of his articles discussing education. Said this in this article. It has been said. It has been said by some who boast of their physiological and phenological research that extreme climate is unfavorable to the spread of civilization, that a full development of the reasoning faculty can only take place where physical circumstances conspire, that the human race is indebted to the climate of England and France for the intellect of Newton, talking about Isaac Newton, of Newton and Laplace. This argument may be admissible in modern times, but the experience of history teaches that it could not be held true with regard to the ancient world, whose civilization was nurtured under the benign influences of a tropical sun. An investigation of the physical circumstances would most surely settle the fact that civilization in its highest order is not the result of an innate superiority of any portion of the human race. This is the intellectual tradition and the philosophical tradition to which Bogle belonged. And these were being expressed in Jamaica, in St. Thomas in the east, and in other parts of Jamaica at the time. And in fact, before I go further, in the 1850s, there were brown Jamaicans and black Jamaicans calling for the establishment of a university in the form of a medical school in the 1850s. Certainly, in 1948, when the University of West Indies was established, it was established first as a medical school. But blacks from the 1850s were calling for the establishment of a medical school. So this is a type of tradition that Bogle represented. And in the slogans of the Morant Bay Rebellion, those slogans in essence captured that kind of intellectual and philosophical ethos which emerged with that class of persons. Needless to say, therefore, a slogan like "Color for Color" also gave rise to something else. The other side of it was a term that was used when one, probably the first black man to be elected to the Jamaican Assembly, George Price, who was at the courthouse during the Morant Bay Rebellion and who was killed. This black man, prominent black man, belonging to the same class of persons that Bogle belonged to, but he was killed. He was in office because of black people, but blacks felt that he was siding with the planters. In fact, they said, and this is their word, that he has black skin and white heart. This was one of the slope. This was one of the ways in which the philosophy emanate around the issue of racial equality, that and ends of how justice should be, or fair, that one cannot be fair if people are held as inferiors and some are held as superiors, and certainly there can be little or no unity if people felt that they were innately inferior to other people. And in fact, when we look at, this was borne out when we look at an interview with some blacks during the course of the suppression of the Morant Bay Rebellion. An American correspondent of an American newspaper interviewed some persons in this parish in St. Anne about the Morant Bay Rebellion. The first man who was interviewed by this correspondent of the New York Daily Tribune said, "Massa, black people too fool. Ask them what them fighting for, and them not able to give you any reason." The second person who was interviewed said, "Black people too fool. Yes, worse than fool. Them no free man already. Background make one laugh for we, one laugh for we all. Thief going on me ground. Law no there for me. Him knock me down. Law there for me. Never see the day when me will trust black Negro to make law to govern me or protect me, little and much." Another one said, the third person was interviewed, said, "I is owner," and this person now belongs to the same class as Bogle, that emerging middle class, that own account group. He said, "I is owner of 5 acres of land. Me have me heart, me house, and me coffee walk. Me have me cat and horse. What going hurt me? For me take myself out of white people law, so go trust black Negro. Them no walk in tomorrow, knock me down, take away my place. Who me going to for ask for protection? Stand safely, my brother. Go plant me coffee and cocoa. Make them innocent Thomas in the East keep them fool to themselves." This is what Bogle and others would have referred to as black skin, white art. The internalization of the philosophy of whiteness to become your eyes and the way you feel and the way you see. There was a letter in the Colonial Standard, the biggest newspaper in Jamaica at the time. The Colonial Standard, in this letter, this person who called himself a Negro wrote about the Morant Bay Rebellion in regret. He says, "No one regrets the late rebellion of St. Thomas in the East more than I. Neither do I believe that Her Majesty," referring to Queen Victoria, "that Her Majesty has amongst all her subjects any that is more loyal than I. I will stake my loyalty against that of the proudest son of English blood or of English aristocracy. The late rebellion of the East was the work of a few of the basest sort of Negroes, men of no education and of any position in the country. The English Times says George William Gordon was a black man. Doubtless, if he had been black, he would have been less aspiring and thereby saved the country from the disgrace brought upon it. The intelligent black man regards the white man as his friend. Political factionists cried, "Color, color." It is the same kind of philosophy which is expressed by this young woman, Justina, also in the 19th century, who was talking about the kind of child that she would like to have when she starts having children. She said, I never could love a black little child same as I do the white. I worship the little master, and if I lucky, even I may have a fair child one day. Not, of course, a real white one. That's asking too much. But still, one that is almost white. And then I'll worship it and work for it for true. Dress it up nicely too, in clean white clothes, with shoes and all, just like a Bakra baby. I hope I never have a black or dark child to shame me. Right? These are some of the type of this is the other side of enslavement. One side of it is expressed in the persons of Bogle, or that man in 1760 during the Taki Rebellion, one of the leaders who was captured, sentenced to death, chained down to the ground, wood packed around him at his feet, just like how we would pack wood to burn coal today. And he was burnt from his feet up, quite alive. An eyewitness report, a white eyewitness report, wrote about it later and said this man uttered not a groan and saw his feet reduced to ashes, and by some means one of his arms got loose. He grabbed a brand from the fire that was consuming him and flung it at the face of his executioner. It is the same philosophy and psychology which led Samuel Sharpe in 1832 to say, I'd rather die on yonder gallows than live in slavery. It is the same tradition expressed in Claude McKay's poem, If We Must Die. So we have this tradition of self-affirmation, of dying rather than living in enslavement, and another tradition that we see in Justina, that the only way to escape is to become white by having children with persons who will make them look brown or fair skin, certainly in her case. But, and we can see the logic behind it, is what I call freedom by subjection. Slavery, the oppression was so great, psychologically, philosophically, physically, so great that persons succumbed to it and felt that the best way to deal with it is to succumb to it. By succumbing to it, you will not be consumed by it. And in order to prevent your children from growing up the way they grew up, it is better if those children were not black. So we can see the logic behind it. So it's better if they don't remember. If they did not have their own memory, it is better if they internalize the memory of whiteness to constitute the guide of their social relationship. This was at a period in St. Thomas in the East. It's a period that we have now. It's a form of education which the African-American scholar Carter G. Woodson talks about. Says, when you control a man's thinking you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. Bogle, and clearly the tradition that he stood for, was against this kind of education. And part of what they were doing was to re-educate people, to show them a different way. Because they recognize that if that doesn't happen, that there will be no unity amongst black. Of course, you can't have the education by fireburning people that, well, you're you know, and so on. You're a rose bread foot or what? Calling names is really not going to help. But education at the formal level, the level where I'm at, and education at the informal level, which is the education that we see emanating from the lips of Bob Marley. That's an informal education. An informal education, and one of the best teachers of that informal education was buried yesterday. Martimo Kumi Plano. That is one kind of education. And at some point, and it is happening, there needs to be a merger, a learning, a reshaping of the formal system by the informal, and the informal by the formal. We need to teach our people about ourselves before anything else.
Part 2 of the Paul Bogle lecture series from the In Search of series back in March 2006. That lecture was delivered by Dr. Clinton Hutton. And so we are now at 3 minutes past 8 o'clock. We continue with part 3.
In fact, one of the conditions that was described as black skin, white heart, bleaching, actually begun in the Great House on the plantation during slavery. The women, the black women who used to clean the floor of the great houses, the mixture of lime or lye that they used to clean the floor, they began to use that lye to wash their faces. That is how it began. So that we can see, therefore, that the issues that people emerging out of slavery, that confronted them, that they need to reshape their lives, had to do with also how do you calibrate and recalibrate the mind. It's very important. How do you learn from your forebears? How do you learn from your ancestors? The importance of memory, ancestral memory. And these memories are found in Kumina, in Revival 60 and 61, in the various traditions of our forebears. The memories are there. The memory in Rastafari. We have to make better use of these for formal and informal educational purposes. What was the ideology, dominant ideology confronting Paul Bogle and his movement? Well, let us look at the Morant Bay and how it was conceived of by the ruling classes. The Gleaner carried an article about the reason for the Morant Bay Rebellion. I'm talking the Gleaner carried an article during that time. Right? I'm not talking about now. The Gleaner was a very important paper then, And it eventually became the most important paper in Jamaica. It's a long history. And it survived, and it's good that it survived. It's really an important institution. Gleaner was controlled by the Dakarda family at the time, and group of Jewish people in Jamaica. The Gleaner at the time carried an article which says, in part, from all that can be ascertained, this outbreak has been well understood for some time past amongst has to do with it as far as planning goes. The rebels seem to be acting systematically. A strange fact when we know that among themselves nothing like system could be suggested, much more acted upon. And the person who was fingered as the principal mastermind was George William Gordon. He had some mind because of that side of him that is white. This is a basic argument in it. Bogle and those people alone could not conceive or plan a rebellion because they did not have the intellectual capacity to do so. The Falmouth Post, another newspaper at the time, of course coming out of Trelawney. The Falmouth Post on December 12, 1865 says in an article, by revolting, the blacks in the West Indies and elsewhere are not yet sufficiently taught to enjoy the great blessings that white men have conferred upon him. End of quote. This is the type of, and hence the bile, for example, in relation to the suppression. You should read the views coming from those newspapers about the suppression. It was real revenge. And in fact, later on, the H.D. Gilisa would have written a novel called Revenge on the Morant Rebellion, right, in the early 20th century. The British intellectuals, some of them, have written a lot on the Morant Rebellion. It had a tremendous impact on Britain, split the intellectual class in Britain. The insurrection of slaves is the most dreadful commotion. One intellectual wrote, an historian by the name of Archibald Allison. I cannot accept the Negro as the equal of an Englishman, nor admit that a Negro insurrection and an English insurrection ought to be treated in the same way. If the falling into the hands of a Jamaican Negro be a different thing from falling into the hands of an Englishman, then the conclusion is self-evident that we are justified in going further to prevent the one calamity than to prevent the other. The incipient civilization, and this is another person, this is Allison again. The incipient civilization of the Negro has been arrested by his emancipation. Now, this is after slavery. People calling against emancipation. Emancipation was wrong. The incipient civilization of the Negro has been arrested by his emancipation. With the cessation of forced labor, the tastes and habits which spring from and compensate it have disappeared, and savage habits and pleasures have resumed their ascendancy over the sable race. And then Tyndall, another British intellectual, says the suppression was necessary to save, quote, the honor of 7,000 British women from the murder and lust of black savages. Right? There was a view around that the purpose of the rebellion was for black men to kill white men and appropriate their women for their pleasures. That was a principal reason given out. But that's up for another time, because the question of sexuality and the characterization of black people and the justification for enslavement and some of the most brutal crimes ever committed in human history are rooted in this view of the perception of black sexuality developed by European men. Nada says, if all that Negroes of all generations have ever done were to be obliterated from recollection forever, the world would lose no great truth, no profitable art, no exemplary form of life. The loss of all that is African would offer no memorable deduction from anything but the earth's black catalogue of crimes. So that this is the kind of ideology that informed the persons what to do, to look at the ideas of the people, what is it that they want, and therefore to argue that racial equality should not be given, should not be conceded, that blacks must be educated to train the hands and eyes and mind for laboring, that blacks should not be only token in government. These are some of the ideas that justify all of that. That justify the killing of 439 persons in 2 weeks, according to the official statistic. And according to my research, something closer to 1,500 people in 2 weeks. That justified the burning down of 1,000 houses in St. Thomas in the east, leaving 20% of the black population homeless, of shaving the heads of women and tarring their heads and sticking feather in their heads. The shaving of persons commenced in Jamaica during what is called the Coral Garden incident. The last time it happened was during the Morant Bay Rebellion. And in 1963, just months after emancipation, in Jamaica, people who were called beards, Rastafari, and I know one in my community in Jericho and Hanover. When I saw that man as a little boy, I was about 8 years old, with his police use a glass bottle to shave him. I'm just saying this to say the last time that people had their head shorn to humiliate them was during the Morant Bay Rebellion, and it happened again just months after independence in Jamaica. The Morant Bay Rebellion must be studied. I don't think that, we need to know more about these things from different perspective, and need to get more in school, and therefore to publish and so on, which is my PhD dissertation 1992 was on the ideological foundation of the Morant Bay Rebellion. And I just want to, in ending, and there are, to say that there are many, many things I could have said. For example, how people who were involved, like Paul Bogle, to develop independent economic ventures, how they were regarded as seditious, and how soldiers were sent to crush people who attempted to set up independent economic venture. Right? And that may be for another time. But to pay tribute to some of the persons who were some of the leaders of the Morant Bay Rebellion. Edward Bailey, E.K. Bailey, was a native Baptist preacher. He was a captain of the Morant Bay Rebellion. He was a member of the Bath militia. This is the militia of the authorities. So this was a man of good standing. He was a member of the militia. He was an upholsterer. He had his own grocery store in Morant Bay. He was shot and killed for trying to escape from the concentration camp that they set up near the beach down in Morant Bay. John Edwards, who was a schoolmaster working for the Wesleyans at Rocky Point in St. Thomas. This teacher was a captain of the Morant Bay Rebellion. He said he was a captain for about 400 rebels in Bath in St. Thomas. He was executed for rebellion on October 20, 1865. John Anderson, who was a colored man, what we call Browning today. John Anderson was a teacher. He was also employed by the Wesleyans to teach. He was detained and given 50 lashes. James Bowie. James Bowie was Paul Bogle's deputy. His title was Captain General. Bowie was a Cuban. Ran away from Cuba, living in St. Thomas. He was hanged on October 24 for rebellion. William Grant, described as an old colored man. He was a saddler. He kept secret meetings to discuss political matters. He was termed by one newspaper a village politician. His title is Captain. He was one of Paul Bogle's deputy. He was founder of the Society of Friends, a social political organization in St. Thomas. One of their roles was to revive, just imagine in 1865, 27 years after emancipation, to revive the anti-slavery societies in Jamaica. That is significant. He was hanged October 24, 1865 for rebellion. Arthur Wellington, a reputed, the best known Obia man in St. Thomas, who told people that the bullets could not hurt them. He was raised by Paul Bogle as a captain of the Morant Bay Rebellion. He was one of those who were administering oath to people to cleave from the blacks and to cleave to the whites in St. Thomas prior to the Morant Bay Rebellion and during the Morant Bay Rebellion. He was a lumberjack. He was a lumberman. He was a freeholder. He was shot and then beheaded. The only person to have been so treated. George McIntosh. McIntosh was a building contractor and often got work from the local authorities in St. Thomas. And he employed people. He was an employer of labor. In fact, he was one of the leading members of the Society of Friends that was founded by William Grant. He was hanged on October 21 for complicity with rebellion. And lastly, William McLaren. McLaren was the only laborer that I have detected amongst the leadership core of the Morant Bay Rebellion. He went to school in Morant Bay. He could read and write. He was the secretary for the Paul Bogle the movement in St. Thomas, and take notes at meetings and help to pass resolution. This young man was 22 years old. He was executed for rebellion. This was an uprising of the people, the emerging Jamaican middle class, in alliance with the laboring class, especially the laborers in sugar. This Morant Bay rebellion was put down brutally. The American government, the State Department, sent a warship to help with soldiers to help to put down the Morant Bay rebellion. The name of the warship was the Reunion, a ship name in the process of the Civil War in the United States to reunite the two, the North and the South, involved in the Civil War. That ship was sent to Jamaica with soldiers to put down the Morant Bay rebellion. The Cuban governor sent 2 warships and and soldiers to help to put down the Morant Bay rebellion. Soldiers were sent from Barbados, Halifax in Canada, to put down the rebellion. That was the depth of it. I thank you very much.
The Sam Sharpe lecture.
Thank you very much. I would like to dedicate this lecture to Richard Hart for his pioneering scholarship on the contribution of African Jamaicans to their struggle for freedom and social justice. Richard Hart was among the first to see the organic link between the building of the national movement and a process of public education through which the Jamaican people could draw inspiration from their own history and their own heroes. His monumental labors in this field remain unparalleled. I would also like in this dedication to include my wife Claire, my children Gillian and Richard, and especially my 2 grandsons, Elijah Asher Bertram Levy and Joshua Richard Joseph Bertram. I would specifically like to commend the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, and in particular its chairman, Professor Vereen Shepherd, for placing her scholarship at the service of the Jamaican people. The partnership forged with IRFM, and which has led to the In Search of series, represents a major landmark in our understanding of the historical process. The energy and commitment of the staff retiree, led by Andrew Williams Green, has been extremely commendable. Now, Sam Sharpe. Samuel Sharpe, designated National Hero of Jamaica, first came to the attention of the colonial authorities in the year he was tried, convicted, and executed for organizing and leading the Emancipation Rebellion of 1831. This rebellion, which began on December 27th, involved close to 60,000 men and women, the majority enslaved, from 300 plantations, pens, rural settlements, and urban holdings. From its center in St. James, it spread first to Trelawney, Westmoreland, Hanover, Manchester, and St. Elizabeth. Its effects were felt in the 2 parishes at the eastern end of the island, St. Thomas and Portland. Despite all this, at the height of the rebellion, considerable ignorance prevailed among the authorities as to the identity of Sam Sharpe. None of them knew him. Hence the imprecision in the proclamation by the governor, the Earl of Belmore, on the 3rd of January, 1832, which offered a reward for the apprehension. And here how Sam Sharpe is described. 1 General Ruler Sam Sharpe, or Tharpe, alias Daddy Ruler Sharpe, or Tharpe, director of the whole rebellion, and styled also preacher to the rebels, belonging to Croydon Estate, St. James. To add to this confusion, the manuscript notes of Sam Sharpe's trial, which took place on April 19th, refers to Samuel Sharpe, slave to Samuel Sharpe, Esquire, of the parish of St. James. The Samuel Sharpe, Esquire referred to was a lawyer who owned a small property called Cooper's Hill on the outskirts of Montego Bay, in the area where you now have the Cornwall Regional Hospital. Sam Sharpe had become a trusted house slave. Consistent with the custom of the day, slaves took the name of their masters. To this day, historians contend as to whether or not the officials who prepared the reward notice and who themselves were most likely ignorant of the man they were describing confused Sam Sharpe with John Sharpe and Daddy Tharp, both local leaders in the rebellion who lived in Catadupa, a rural village adjoining Croydon Estate. The confusion which still prevails as to his identity, birth, and early years need not detain us, for we must not lose sight of the fact that slave did not leave written records for posterity. But for the rebellion, Sam Sharpe, like so many other African Jamaicans of singular genius, would have lived and died as though they had not been. Yet, if we consider freedom to be the single most important asset in our struggle for nationhood, Sam Sharpe can justly claim pride of place as the greatest Jamaican of all times, for he more so than any other is the symbol of our transformation from slavery and the architect of our liberation at a most critical point. As to his identity, I am of the view that the Sam Sharpe described as a field slave at Croydon is the same Sam Sharpe which reappears as a house slave in Cooper's Hill. Why do I say this? The detailed knowledge displayed by Sam Sharpe of the interior of St. James in the organization and conduct of the rebellion, and his intimacy with the leaders, strengthens the official claim that he was born and spent his early years among the slaves on the properties in the hills of St. James that were in close proximity to Croydon. Just let us take a look and see some of these people who were leaders and where they were. There was Dove at Belvedere, Tharp, Hazellymph. There were Guthrie at Montpelier. There was Johnson at Retrieve. These are some of the leaders Sam Sharpe recruited, and their conduct in the rebellion suggests these are people he would have known over a period of time. One fact, however, about which all are agreed is that Sam Sharpe lived in Montego Bay for some time before the 1831 rebellion. Indeed, one of the rebel leaders, Robert Gardner, testified that the rebellion had been on their minds since 1824. This date is particularly significant for the fact that on the 28th of January that year, 14 slaves from the Unity Hall and Spring Garden estates in the parish of St. James were charged with planning to enter into a rebellious conspiracy for the purpose of obtaining by force and violence and by acts of resistance the freedom of themselves and other such slaves. Interestingly, one of those charged went by the name of Croydon. One is tempted to speculate, would this Croydon have anything at all to do with our national hero Sam Sharpe? Given Sam Sharpe's central role in the planning of the rebellion, it is entirely likely that he was already working at Cooper's Hill Estate in Montego Bay at this point, and would have been a member of the First Baptist Church for which Thomas Burchell had been minister since 1822. Sam Sharpe also had other reasons for being in Montego Bay. He was married to a slave at Content, an estate located in the western end of Montego Bay, and from the records that are available, visited her often. His brother William, with whom he seemed to have had a close relationship, also lived in Montego Bay. What was Sam Sharpe like? I've always looked at the artistic impressions that are available, and in particular the official one. They all tend to portray a balding man, fairly mature in age. The description given by the Methodist minister is not consistent with those artistic impressions. And I quote Henry Bleby's description. Bleby speaks of a young man of middle size. His fine sinewy frame was handsomely molded, and his skin as perfect a jet as can well be imagined. His forehead was high and broad, while his nose and lips exhibited the usual characteristics of the Negro race. He had teeth whose regularity and pearly whiteness a court beauty might have envied, and eyes whose brilliancy were almost dazzling. Bleby visited with Sam Sharpe often while he was in jail, and found him the most intelligent and remarkable slave he had ever met. According to Bleby, Sharpe possessed intellectual and oratorical powers above the common order, and this was the secret of the extensive influence which he exercised. Reading Bleby's description of Sam Sharpe brings to mind one of Sharpe's contemporaries, Nat Turner, the slave from the state of Virginia in the United States of America, who was born the same year as Sam Sharpe and led the rebellion to which his name has been appended 4 months before Sam Sharpe's Emancipation Rebellion in Jamaica. This is how they describe Turner. His moral facilities were very strong, and in general so marked were his early peculiarities that people said he had too much sense to be raised as a slave. He fasted, prayed, preached, read the Bible, and communicated his revelations to the awestruck slaves. Sam Sharpe, what dominant feature of the international economic system for 2 centuries. By then, the Atlantic slave trade had forcibly brought millions of Africans to the Caribbean and the Americas to be enslaved on estates and plantations, pens and settlements, to create immense fortunes for the major European colonial powers. Sam Sharpe also was born at a time when the critique of slavery had been fairly well developed. On the economic side, Adam Smith had already published The Wealth of Nations, which asserted that the work done by free men comes cheaper than the work performed by slaves. The British humanitarians had begun their challenge of the slave trade, and on the 22nd of May 1787, Granville Sharpe, Thomas Clarkson, and 10 others, including a majority of Quakers, had formed the committee which evolved into the Abolition Society. Politically, it was a world that was still feeling the effects of the French Revolution of 1789, which shook all the European monarchies and their colonial empires to the foundations. The revolution's advocacy of republicanism, as well as its denunciation of slavery, gave credence to its slogan, liberty, equality, and fraternity. It was in this new international situation, which came about as a direct result of the influence of the French Revolution, that Toussaint Louverture, himself a slave in the island neighboring Jamaica, Saint-Domingue, which eventually became Haiti, organized and led the most successful slave revolution in history. Under Toussaint, his army of slaves defeated first the local whites and their allies, then the royalist faction of the French army, a Spanish invasion, a British expedition of some 60,000 men, and then set about rebuilding the colony to its former level of prosperity. These were the general activities taking place in the world at the time when Sam Sharpe was born. It is also extremely significant, although Sam Sharpe would not have understood this until much later in his life, that Toussaint was not able to complete the revolution he started, nor rebuild Saint-Domingue to the level of prosperity he would have liked. In 1801, he was kidnapped and exiled to France, and with him out of the way, all prospects for the orderly development and prosperity of Saint-Domingue disappeared. The first Black Republic was then drowned in blood. And the actual manner of it, I would encourage my readers, my listeners, to read and take very, very careful account. Jamaica is just 90 miles from Saint-Domingue, and the events there were graphically discussed in Jamaica by refugees who kept on coming. Sam Sharpe would have been only 3 years old when the Republic of Haiti was declared. But over time, the events here would impact considerably on his own outlook and approach. From another perspective, if we go now to Southern Africa, at the time of Sam Sharpe's birth, this is the time when Shaka Zulu, from his base in Southern Africa, was about to begin his spectacular entry into world history. In the space of 12 years, Shaka Zulu organized an immense army of skilled and disciplined warriors to conquer and pacify a territory larger than Europe. The military experts of Shaka Zulu certainly rivaled those of his contemporary Napoleon Bonaparte. And now we come to Sam Sharpe's Jamaica. What was the Jamaica in which Sam Sharpe was born? For almost a century before Sam Sharpe was born, no colony exceeded Jamaica's economic importance to Britain. For much of that century, 1/12 of Britain's total imports came from Jamaica. Sam Sharpe's parents were among the 711,000 Africans brought to Jamaica to be enslaved in the period between the English capture of the island in 1655 and the abolition of the slave trade in 1807. I would like to give listeners just one indication of just how cruel a system plantation slavery was. If we look at the fact that 711,000 Africans came to Jamaica, and we assume a normal cycle of reproduction and increase, by the time of abolition, we would have had a population of some 2 million African Jamaicans. Yet, in the year of abolition, the slave population was only 311,000. To take this argument further, from 311,000 in 1834, after abolition, when you have a more normal rate of reproduction and increase, 150 years after, the population did move to 2 million. Who were these slaves? What was the level of training and intelligence? For a very extended period, we have been led to believe that they were in the main ignorant brutes whose first taste of civilization came as a result of their enslavement. Nothing could be further from the truth. The record shows that the slave population included engineers, builders, welders, wheelwrights, shipwrights, in short, practitioners of the most advanced skills in the then known world. The sugar factory was perhaps the most advanced technological process of the day. That's the making of sugar. And the position of head boiler to determine at what point it is taken off was a position normally held by a slave. If we look at some other examples of Sam Sharpe's contemporaries, you get a much better feel for what I'm talking about. Take the case of Francis Williams, a young black man in Spanish Town. During the tenure of Governor Trelawney, 1738 to 48, The Duke of Montagu decided to carry out an experiment to determine whether a Negro trained at a grammar school and then at a university would be found equal in literary attainments to a white man. Francis Williams was selected for this experiment and dutifully sent off to an English public school and from there to Cambridge University. He did exceptionally well, and on his return to Jamaica, his patron proposed a seat for him in the Legislative Council. The governor opposed his proposal on the basis that it would affect the willingness of slaves to submit to bondage if one of their own were to be so elevated. Francis Williams opened a school in Spanish Town, taught classical education. When the next governor came, he wrote an extended poem in Latin welcoming him. All to no avail. He never ever got a position in this society. Look briefly at two others of Sam Sharpe's contemporaries. Born the same year as Sam Sharpe was John Brown Rosseram, a slave in Portland who at 19 years of age left for the United States, having been adopted by a Quaker family. He attended first the Hebron Academy in Maine, was then later enrolled in college in 1824 and became the first black graduate from an American college. 3 years later, along with Sam Cornish, he edited Freedom Journal, the first newspaper in the United States to be owned, operated, published, and edited by African Jamaicans. Take the case on the southern side of Jamaica, Archibald Monteith, an African prince from the Igbos who was kidnapped at age 12, ended up in Jamaica and on an estate in St. Elizabeth owned by the Crepes, a Moravian family. Archibald Monteith became a leader of the Moravian Church, bought his freedom, gained considerable influence over both the enslaved and free communities in St. Elizabeth. To this day, he's venerated as a leader of that church. Very important for this lecture. How did we build a revolutionary tradition among Jamaican slaves over time? And this tradition, being what Sam Sharpe inherited, in what way did it impact or contribute to the success of the Sam Sharpe's Emancipation Rebellion of 1831? The historical records certainly support the claim that African slaves in Jamaica were perhaps the most rebellious in any part of the world. Look at the record. The English arrived in 1655. By the time they had established a civil administration and started the first set of plantations, there's record of a rebellion in 1673 in the parish of St. Anne. A contemporary report states that the slaves were able to secure arms and ammunition, and about 200 of them retired to the mountains. 2 years later, this is 1679, 35 slaves were executed for participating in a conspiracy to rebel. They were at it again in 1676, and before the end of the century there were slave rebellions at Caymanas, Vere, Guanabo Vale. In a letter dated September 28, 1686, a member of the Privy Council Committee informed his colleagues that the rebel Negroes, variously reported at from 40 to 100, have made themselves plantations in the mountains, from which they descend in the plains in great numbers. All this was a prelude to the major rebellion which took place on Sutton's estate in Clarendon on the 29th of July 1690, when some 500 slaves seized arms and ammunition, killed the overseer, and this pattern continued right up to the First Maroon War of 1734. Maroon communities had been established over time by slaves who gained their freedom from the Spanish when the British came in 1655. And by the time of Sam Sharpe, conducted their affairs as a virtual independent state in a liberated geographical area. Of extreme importance is the treaty arrived at between the Maroons and the British after the First Maroon War. This treaty signed with Codjo at the Maroon camp in Trelawney between 1738 and 1739, listen carefully, obliged the Maroons in return for their freedom to use their best endeavors to take, kill, suppress, or destroy, either by themselves or jointly with any other number of men commanded on that service by His Excellency the Governor or Commander-in-Chief for the time being, all rebels, wheresoever they be throughout the island, unless they submit to the same terms of accommodation granted to Captain Codjo and his successors. It is at this point you have the classical point of departure in this divide and rule. The treaty signed between the Maroons and the British required the Maroons to join the British authorities to put an end to any other slave rebellion. So while we accord the respect and admiration the Maroons deserve for their consistent fight against the British slave owners, let there be no doubt that their freedom was achieved in part at the expense of the rest of the black slave population. Eminent historian C.L.R. James makes a very serious observation when he says, political treachery is not a monopoly of the white race, and political leadership is a matter of program, strategy, and tactics, and not the color of those who lead it, their oneness of origin with the people, nor past services they have rendered. And this was the background against which we now come to Taki's rebellion in 1760. Before Taki, slave rebellions are to secure the freedom for those who are fought. And in most cases, having fought, seized arms and ammunition, destroyed some property, they have retired to the mountains. Taki's rebellion establishes a different perspective. And from all we understand, Taki aimed at liberating almost the entire North Coast and establishing some kind of rule over that area. The actual conduct of Taki's war, the really started briskly. Early days they took all before them. The fort of Fort Maria set fire to Haywood Hall, took charge of Esher before doubling back to Ballard's Valley. Defeated the local militia, engaged 2 detachments of British soldiers, but in the end the Maroons decided the outcome in favor of the authorities. Taki, it was reported, met his death at the hands of the Maroons, who decollated the body in order to preserve the head as a trophy of victory. The report goes on to express some gruesome details as to how he met his death. But in the planning, scope, and the objectives of the rebellion led by Taki in 1760, we see a prelude to Sam Sharpe's Emancipation Rebellion of 1831. From freedom for those who fight to running away in the hills, we have Taki wanting to preside over a liberated area on the plains, and then Sam Sharpe, who establishes a difference with all previous rebellions by fighting for freedom for all, full emancipation. By so many of them ended without achieving the objective set out has to do with the divisions between slave communities at the time in Jamaica.
As we continue on the Africa Forum, Running African, for this morning, the 23rd day of November, yeah man, as Kabu travels en route to the One Nation Reggae Festival in Sierra Leone. Yeah, man, we're here occupying your time by giving you some vital information. Yeah, man. Lectures from the In Search of series, IRFM In Search of series. And so we continue now to hear from Arnold Bertram, historian and former member of parliament, so cabinet minister. So the Sam Sharpe lecture series, part 3.
I would just like to spend a minute on the divisions which existed among the African slave community at the time. We must not lose sight of the fact that enslaved Africans, many of them, the Europeans were able to get because of warring tribes in Africa. Don Robotham, the eminent sociologist, reminds us that not much imagination is needed to realize that whatever the historical roots of those hostilities in Africa, the fact of being sold into slavery, sometimes by members of the self-same group they now confronted in the Caribbean as fellow slaves, could only have intensified the ill will which had emerged between traditional ethnic groups. Recrimination and individualism, rather than solidarity and cooperation, were thus what characterized the initial phase of enslavement in the Caribbean. By the time of Sam Sharpe, an environment had been created for greater cooperation. And a major factor in this new environment was the work of the missionary churches, to which I now come, and in particular, Sam Sharpe's relationship with the Baptist Church. The Moravians were the first European missionaries to arrive. They came in 1754. And it is with them that the exposure of enslaved Jamaicans to Christianity began. The native Baptists were the next to arrive, when George Lyle, a slave from the state of Virginia in the United States of America, who was ordained a minister as early as 1775 and who fought on the side of the British in the American War of Independence, in order to escape the threat of re-enslavement, accepted a suggestion from a Baptist officer that he go to Jamaica, where there was a large black population waiting to be ministered unto. Lyle arrived in Kingston in 1782 and began preaching on the Kingston race course. In spite of sustained persecution, Lyle was able to baptize some 500 persons within 7 years, and in 1791 built the first Baptist church in Jamaica at the corner of Victoria and Elsie Road in Kingston. That same year, the Second Baptist Church was established, this time in Crooked Spring in the parish of St. James, by Moses Baker, who had also been enslaved in the United States and came to Jamaica. Baker traveled to Western Jamaica on the invitation of Lascelles Wynne, a Quaker and owner of Adelphi Estate in St. James. Wynne had gone to Kingston to buy some slaves, many of whom belonged to Lyle's church, and to provide for their continued religious education, Wynne secured the services of Baker. Baker and Lyle then invited the English Baptists to send a missionary to assist them, the first one coming in 1814. But it is with the arrival of Thomas Burchell in 1822 that the expansion of the English Baptist Church began. But already there was a native Baptist church, an African Jamaican church within an African Jamaican cultural tradition. I must say something about the organization of the Baptist Church, because it was this organization that Sam Sharpe was able to tap into to develop the revolutionary organization which conducted the 1831 rebellion. From the Methodists and the Moravians, the Baptists learned the principles of organization, and the church was organized along these lines. The outer circle, what you call inquirers. Military side, Sam Sharpe had a major challenge. Unlike the militia and the British soldiers, he could not practice, he could not train. But yet he did have a plan for a rebel military formation of sorts. But this was so rudimentary and inadequate for the task of dislodging an establishment with strong armed forces at its disposal. Sharpe's military plan envisioned the formation of a large mobile body of fighters, organized in 3 or 4 companies and of local units based on a plantation or a group of adjoining plantations. The language of the leaders of the rebellion has a decidedly military tone. They themselves speak of regiments, companies, generals, colonels, captains. In terms of a military strategy, it is clear that Sam Sharpe knew he could not fight the British armies in open. And you'll notice in the first round, the estates on the flat in Montego Bay like Rose Hall are out of the picture. He's concentrating on the same route that he has developed with the Baptist Church of the interior, where it is possible to wage a guerrilla-style war. Draw the regiments up to him. When the British forces come to Montego Bay, they offer the direct opposite. They don't want to pursue Sam Sharpe's army on individual estates. They wait until they gather or wait for them in Montego Bay. And you see these two strategies unfolding in the conduct of the rebellion. But Sam Sharpe would have had a difficulty in that he can't train soldiers in the open. It's difficult to communicate all the details of a military plan, particularly when you have mobilized the slave population on the basis of a general strike. But as the day approached, the Baptist authorities got wind of what was being planned. And Nib in particular, in Falmouth, got word, and on the 27th, went to Salters Hill in St. James, where a new Baptist chapel was to be dedicated. This was the occasion Nib used to try to demobilize the general strike and the rebellion Sam Sharpe was planning. Here are Nib's words to his congregation. I am pained to the soul at being told that many of you agreed not to go to work anymore for your owners, and I fear this is true. I learned that some wicked persons persuaded you that the King of England has made you free. Hear me, I love your souls, and I would not tell you a lie for the whole world. I assure you that it is false, false as hell can make. I entreat you not to believe it, but to go to your work as formerly. Nib got a very sullen response from the over 1,000 people congregated for the opening of the new chapel. The Methodists also tried to help to diffuse the rebellion. And it is significant that while Sam Sharpe had planned to start on the days after the Christmas break with a general strike, it is the same night of Nib's with Sharpe's plan. Whether the man who set it was one of those who had been upset by the talk of the missionaries that there's no possibility of freedom, nothing has been passed, they have been mistaken, they have been misinformed. But with the torching of Kensington, 16 similar fires followed the following day. The general strike was no longer an option, and for the next 3 months, the rebellion would proceed in terms of a series of military engagements. By the 30th of December, martial law was declared, and the governor dispatched Sir Willoughby Cotton to Montego Bay with reinforcements. To give an idea of what Sam Sharpe's army was arrayed against, on January the 1st, General Sir Willoughby Cotton, the officer commanding the British troops stationed in Jamaica, arrived at Montego Bay aboard the HMS Sparrowhawk. Before him, the HMS Racehorse had landed with Marines, and right after him, the HMS Blanche with soldiers from Port Royal. Already in the area were the local militias, and close by, in proximity and ready, were the Maroons. Once Willoughby Cotton arrived, he immediately set up a court-martial, and he expresses the view. Initially, it is to begin a series of executions to make the rebel army understand that they are fighting for their lives. There's not going to be any mercy. The series of engagements which follow shows Sam Sharpe's army without the firepower of the regular soldiers, without the training that a regular army has. The strategy being to move from plantation to plantation and see as far as possible getting the slaves that are there to support. Sharpe himself was very careful that he did not want to destroy property uselessly, nor did he want to take the life of anyone who did not directly oppose the objectives of freedom. The British armies, the militia, and then supported by the Maroons, are of a different cast of mind. Their whole intention is to terrorize the population. And I'm tempted to just give you a comparison in terms of members of the slave army who are killed. Corpses are left on the road to rot. Other slaves coming by are expected to be terrified. Those that are caught and are subject to a court-martial and sentence, the sentences are extremely severe. Let us take a look at some of these punishments. In St. James, 106 slaves tried by court-martial, 99 are convicted. 84 sentenced to death. The rest are given these kinds of punishments. 500 lashes. Another sentence of 300 lashes. Another sentence of 350 lashes. The actual conduct of the death penalties, whether by shooting or by hanging, you get a general impression between January right into February of just a deliberate design to terrorize this slave population, let them know what they're up against, and let them never ever think of rebelling again. In the middle of this rebellion, the planters came up with a specific kind of response. And on January 26th, they formed what we know as the Colonial Church Union. This organization is in every way a forerunner of the notorious Ku Klux Klan, which appeared in the state of Georgia at the end of the American Civil War. While professing to uphold the Constitution, the church union ran directly at the Baptist Church. The new church at Salters Hill, opened on the 27th, was the first to go, set on fire by members of the St. James Militia. On the 7th of February, Nibbs Chapel in Falmouth, destroyed, followed by Stewarttown Church, then Burchell's Baptist Church. Right here in St. Anne, the failure of building the Baptist church. 5 different occasions it was destroyed by members of the militia led by Hamilton Brown, after whom the town is named, mark you, and who was the owner of the property at Minard. But the role of the Colonial Church Union during the rebellion and the direct targeting of the Baptist church and the Baptist populations is something that I think we have not sufficiently understood or studied enough. I come now to Sam Sharpe himself during the rebellion. The movements that he's showing, he's up and down with the army, encouraging as he could, but with the consciousness that having lost the initiative of the general strike, he never ever got back the momentum of the rebellion. But still you have to consider, for Sam Sharpe in St. James to have organized a rebellion in which 60,000 slaves are participating, in the army, free blacks fighting in the army. This must be a major departure in terms of a class alliance of not just slaves, but fighting under slave leadership for the abolition of slavery. It's a truly remarkable feat. By March 1832, it was clear the rebellion would not achieve the objective it had set out. And the lifting of martial law was the first indication that the British authorities were satisfied that they had got the upper hand as far as the rebellion is concerned. Sam Sharpe himself surrendered in early April. And his trial on the 19th of April, the said Negro man slave named Samuel Sharpe to be taken from hence to the place from which he came, and from thence to the place of execution. He was valued by the jury at the time for the sum of 16 pounds currency in Jamaica. Sam Sharpe's conduct all during his imprisonment and on the day of his execution was exemplary. Those who watched him watched a most dignified man, no doubt at all about his character, his conviction about the cause for which he had fought. In terms of his own last bit of advice, and this is very important, not one, neither Sam Sharpe nor any of the rebel leaders implicated the leaders of the Baptist Church. The governor and the colonial authorities tried everything to have one of the slave leaders say something that would implicate the Baptists. They never ever did. The slave leaders were promised all kinds of pardons in return for speaking. All of them were killed. And when one looks at the results of the rebellion, we get a very clear picture as to the extent of damage done. Based on the official estimates, 619 rebels were killed, 307 in open rebellion, and 312 executed by slave courts. Brathwaite puts the figure a bit higher. He estimates that over 1,000 enslaved people were shot and killed. By contrast, only 14 whites were killed, with 12 having been wounded. The official records also indicate 3 colored men were killed and 2 wounded in the armed struggle.